So thank you for coming here today. Today is a special PA colloquium where we recognize the work of our graduate students with the Etienne Van de Waal Award. Just to say a few words about Etienne, we're lucky enough to have her, who was a longtime colleague of Etienne.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for being here. We need an immense amount of Etienne. He was the soul of the Population Studies Center. Jerry would know more than I about Etienne's arrival and so on. Sam used to tell some good stories. But I was saying to Jerry, I can remember it was over 40 years ago, the first time professionally I ever came to Penn. Etienne and Strong took me out. There was Huntsman building wasn't there, and there were some places you could eat pretty cheap, and that's where Etienne took me. Wonderful guy, very famous. I could tell you a lot about his academic thing, but I always like to remind people he was really a fascinating character. I mean, he had been asked to Kufu about this sometime. He had been a colonial administrator in the Congo. He and Francine, his wife, had 4 kids there in 4 years. His background was in law. He eventually came to the US, got into demography and so on. And like I said, all that stuff you can find up on the web and so on. What you won't find is that he adored science fiction. He always loved it. We'd be talking about a student after an exam or something like that, and he would go, oh, it's like in the novel, blah, blah, blah. I go, what are you talking about? Oh, you don't read science fiction. He saw the world through science fiction. It's not quite cold enough. He was an avid golfer. In December and January, he and Francine would golf in the snow in Cobb's Creek. A really wonderful guy. I'm droning on and on. You've got some people here who want to talk about their work. But I do want to say, just as there are giants here now, there were giants here in the past. Etienne was a wonderful fellow. He loved the business. He loved passing on the things he did to others. He would love to see the kind of work that's being done because he just liked new stuff. He liked the continuity and so on. So thanks very much for letting me say a few words about Etienne, a very, very wonderful man. And now for the real stuff.
Thank you. This year is unique because we have a very fantastic submissions. So actually we have 2 awards, and so two graduate students received the award. So to introduce our first awardee is Courtney Ball.
Thanks. It's great to see so many people here. I have the honor this afternoon of introducing Allison Dunatchik, who is a joint PhD candidate in sociology and demography here at Penn. Allison's research examines how work, family, and gender and public policies shape inequalities in both economic outcomes and the allocation of time across the life course. Particular attention to how gender inequalities change over time and across social groups and contexts. Allison has a really remarkable publication record with a number of research papers published in top journals, including Gender and Society, Sociological Science, and the European Sociological Review. Today, Allison's going to be presenting her paper, His and Hers Earning Trajectories, Marital Homogamy and Long-Term Earnings Inequality Between and Within Different Sex Couples, a really short, punchy title. I have to say, as a member of the prize committee this year, I can speak to the incredibly high quality of the work. The committee was impressed not only by the theoretical contribution of this paper, but by its creative and careful empirical design. I'm really looking forward to the talk today, so please join me in welcoming them.
Great, thank you so much. Hi everyone, nice to see you all. So yes, I'll be presenting my paper, His and Hers Earnings Trajectories, Economic Homogamy and Long-Term Earnings Inequality Within and Between Different Couples. And in this study, I examined how husbands and wives' earnings develop over the course of marriage, the long-term association between spouses' earnings, and then I draw out the implications of this long-term association for both gender equality and for economic inequalities. And the study is really motivated by recent research and popular discussion about the so-called rise of economic homogamy or economically egalitarian marriages. And I think this rise of egalitarian marriages is well summarized in this figure on the screen here. This figure comes from a report that was published by the Pew Research Center last year. The authors are drawing on some data from the current population survey on different sex married couples. And they're tracking over time the proportion of couples that can be considered economically egalitarian. So these couples, they define as couples where the wife earns between 40 to 60% of couple earnings. And so we can see here that the proportion of these egalitarian couples has increased from 11% in 1972 up to 29% in 2022. And at the same time, we can see that the proportion of couples where the wife is the main or sole breadwinner has also tripled, and we see a pretty precipitous decline in the proportion of couples where the husband is the main or sole breadwinner. This constitutes a pretty substantial change in the economic arrangements of different sex couples over the past 50 years or so. And when this report was published, it made a little bit of a splash in the news media, and media reactions to these findings really kind of fell into two main camps. So one type of reaction really focused more on the gender equality story. So the headline from the USA Today that reads, "More women are earning as much as their husbands, so why are wives still doing the laundry?" And then the second type of reaction really focused more on thinking about what the implications of this increasing similarity between spouses in terms of their earnings might be for broader inequalities between households. So the headline for the New York Times that reads, "Equality in marriage grows, and so does class divide." I think these two types of reactions really embody a key tension in thinking about what the implications of a growing association between spouses' earnings might be more broadly. We know that economic homogamy is consequential for gender equality and for women's economic standing within society. So the degree to which husbands and wives' earnings are similar is consequential for the division of household labor and the balance of bargaining power within couples. It's also important for women's economic self-reliance, their ability to leave unhappy marriages and support independent households. And accumulated over the life course, women's economic contributions to the household are also important for their economic outcomes later in life. But on the other hand, economic homogamy is also consequential for broader inequalities between households. So while greater similarity between spouses in terms of their earnings seems to suggest greater gender equality within couples, it also suggests that households are becoming increasingly doubly advantaged and doubly disadvantaged as we increasingly have higher earning husbands married to higher earning wives and lower earning husbands married to lower earning wives. The distance between these households increases. And as this inequality increases, this of course may have other implications for children's life chances within these households and for economic inequalities in the next generation. Today, the vast majority of scholarship on economic homogamy has really largely relied on cross-sectional data to capture this association between husbands and wives' earnings. But I argue that these cross-sectional approaches are all inherently quite limited in the insight that they can really provide into what this changing association between spouses' earnings might mean for both gender equality and for economic inequalities. One key limitation of these cross-sectional approaches is that they really can't account for the fact that husbands and wives' earnings develop in very gendered ways over the life course. We know this from an abundance of research on gender, work, and family that women's, and particularly white women's earnings and employment tend to decline substantially following the birth of children. And we also know that wives' earnings tend to be quite responsive to changes in spouses' employment earnings and working hours. And so what this means is that the cross-sectional association between spouses' earnings is really likely to vary substantially over the marriage. This is likely to be a dynamic process rather than a static state of being that we can really adequately capture at a particular point in time. And the second limitation of these cross-sectional approaches is that they're really only able to capture a pretty conceptually narrow definition of what similarity or equality in earnings is between spouses. But at least in theory, gender equality in earnings could be achieved in a variety of different ways over the marital life or over the course of long-term relationships. So in some couples, long-term equality in earnings could look like this within a couple where we have two spouses who have pretty similar levels of earnings at each point over the marital life course. But equally, long-term gender equality in earnings in other couples could look like this, where we have two spouses who appear to alternate over time whose career whose earnings takes priority and who takes the back seat. And cross-sectional measures of earnings homogamy are really unlikely to capture this particular version of gender equality. And finally, a third limitation of these cross-sectional approaches is that we know that earnings are dynamic and that they fluctuate substantially over time. And in fact, we know that this is increasingly the case in the US, given the rise of precarious employment and earnings instability. And furthermore, we know that earnings instability is also socially stratified, with lower paid, lower educated workers more likely to experience earnings instability. And so the extent to which earnings stability and earnings instability is concentrated within couples may be an important dimension of economic homogamy to examine, but we're really not able to get at this in cross-sectional approaches. Right, so we're not able to distinguish between a version of homogamy or equality that looks like this, where we have two spouses who have pretty similar, pretty stable levels of earnings, versus one that looks like this, where we have two spouses whose earnings fluctuate similarly over time. And these two versions of equality or homogamy are likely to be experienced in very different ways. Okay. So in this study, I aim to address these limitations of cross-sectional approaches by taking a long-term approach to measuring earnings homogamy and the association between spouses' earnings. So specifically, I aim to address three main research questions. So first, what are the typical earnings trajectories that husbands and wives follow over the marital life course? And second, what is the long-term association between spouses' earnings? And how does this differ from cross-sectional estimate? And then finally, in the third question, which I'll just have a few minutes to preview today, I examine how spouses' socioeconomic characteristics at the time of marriage predict the long-term earnings configurations that couples ultimately follow, to try to understand what this long-term association means for both gender equality and for economic. To do this, I draw on some data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth from 1979. So this is a nationally representative cohort study of men and women born between 1967 and 1964. And I'm drawing on data from 1979 to 2018. My sample consists of working age men and women in different sex first marriages who married in the year 1979 or later between the ages of 18 and 50. And I further restrict my sample to couples where we have at least 4 waves of non-missing earnings information for both spouses. This gives me a sample of 5,354 couples who are then followed on average for 16 waves of data. And in the study, I used dual group-based trajectory modeling to examine how husbands and wives' earnings trajectories develop over the course of marriage and the association between these trajectories. So group-based trajectory modeling can be thought of as sort of a longitudinal extension of a latent class analysis type of approach. So in the way that latent class analysis assumes that there are latent clusters of individuals in the population who share particular characteristics, group-based trajectory modeling assumes that there are latent clusters of individuals in the population or ideal types who follow approximately similar developmental patterns. This is a little bit conceptually different from more conventional approaches to modeling longitudinal data like growth curve modeling, where we typically estimate a single mean population trajectory, and then we can examine how particular events or characteristics might explain deviation from this mean. Instead, in group-based trajectory modeling, we estimate multiple qualitatively distinct developmental trajectories. This is essentially a data-driven approach to modeling population heterogeneity in developmental patterns. And I'm happy to talk more about the method and what works in the Q&A for anyone who might be interested. I do use a dual extension of this group-based trajectory model that allows me to simultaneously estimate husbands and wives' earnings trajectories and their association. So my outcomes here are the log of husbands and wives' earnings. Time is measured as years since marriage, which ranges from the year of marriage up to a maximum of 30 years after marriage. And in group-based trajectory modeling, this process of identifying these trajectory groups or these ideal types is really an iterative process of model selection. So in this study, I tested models varying the number of groups included in the model for both husbands and wives from 1 to 8, and ultimately selected a model with 6 distinct long-term earnings patterns for wives and 4 earnings patterns for husbands. And I'm happy to talk more about the model selection process and share any given statistics in the Q&A as well. Okay, so on to some results. So what are the typical earnings trajectories that husbands and wives follow over the course of marriage? Looking first at the results for wives. So here I show the predicted earnings trajectories for each of these 6 earnings groups identified in the model and their associated probabilities. We have the log of annual earnings here on the y-axis, years since marriage on the x-axis, And the thickness of these trajectories are weighted by the relative frequency with which these groups are observed. So we can see here that by far the most common long-term earnings pattern identified in the model is actually a stable earnings pattern. 55% of wives follow a long-term earnings pattern in marriage that's really characterized by stability. 12% of wives followed a career climber pattern shown, or a career pause pattern shown in orange. These wives start off marriage with pretty substantial earnings. The earnings decline pretty sharply following marriage, remain low for a period, and then eventually do return to that initial starting point. 9% of wives followed a career climber pattern shown in pink. So these wives have pretty low earnings at the start of marriage, but experience earnings increases throughout marriage. 9% of wives followed a low earner pattern. These wives have pretty low earnings throughout marriage. 9% followed a late decreasing pattern. These wives experience earnings growth in the first start of marriage, and then their earnings decline thereafter. And finally, 7% of wives followed an early exit. These wives start off marriage with pretty substantial earnings. Their earnings decline pretty precipitously over the course of the first third of marriage, remain low for a period, and then just start to re-increase here at the end of this period. Looking at the results for husbands, we see some similarities to what we see for wives. So again, the most common long-term earnings pattern for husbands is also the stable earnings pattern. So 77% of husbands followed a stable earnings pattern. 9% of wives or husbands experience earnings declines over the course of marriage. 7% followed a late increasing pattern. So these husbands have pretty low earnings for the first third of marriage, and then their earnings increase thereafter. And then finally, 7% followed a career climber pattern, similar to what we saw for wives. These husbands have pretty low earnings at the start of marriage. Their earnings increase pretty sharply following marriage and then remain pretty high thereafter. There are a few key takeaways to note from these initial trajectory results. The first results show that wives' long-term earnings patterns show greater variation than husbands do, both in terms of the number of distinct long-term earnings patterns identified in the model and in terms of variation over time in earnings. But I also find that a majority of both husbands and wives follow a stable earnings pattern in marriage. And this is perhaps a little bit surprising, particularly for wives, given that the dominant focus of scholarship on wives' earnings and labor market behavior within the context of different sex marriages has really been focused on explaining declines in wives' earnings. What we see here is that for a majority of wives, earnings actually don't seem to decline substantially over the course of marriage. And then finally, I think it's also important to emphasize that the results also show that not all husbands follow a stable. And again, I think this is sort of the dominant assumption about husbands' labor market behavior in the context of different sex marriages. But I do find that about a quarter of husbands follow these alternative, less stable earnings patterns. Okay, so now that we have a sense of what these long-term earnings patterns look like for husbands and wives, how do these patterns relate to one another within couples? And what can we learn about economic mobility? This figure shows all 24 possible combinations of these 6 earnings groups for wives and 4 earnings groups for husbands and their associated frequencies. We have wives' earnings groups occupying the columns here, husbands' groups in the rows. And then in each of these cells, the solid line represents the predicted earnings trajectory for husbands in this group, and the dashed line represents the predicted earnings trajectory for wives. This number here indicates the proportion of couples who share this particular combination of husbands and wives. This is a lot of information to take in, right? With these 24 possible combinations, it's a little bit difficult to really see the underlying patterns here and get a sense of what this means for economic mobility. So in the next stage of analysis, I categorized each of these 24 possible combinations of husbands and wives earnings groups into 5 main couple types, based on the shape of the earnings trajectory within these groups and the level of earnings in these groups as well. And so these 5 couple types include the 3 more gender egalitarian patterns that I mentioned previously. So we have a dual career pattern where we have 2 spouses who have pretty similar, pretty stable levels of earnings over time. A jointly mobile pattern where we have 2 spouses whose earnings vary in similar ways over time. And a taking turns pattern where we have 2 spouses who alternate over time who's the primary. And I also examined 2 long-term patterns of specialization, including a long-term male breadwinner and a long-term female. And I find that about 50% of couples ultimately follow a dual career pattern. And this dual career couple type is really largely comprised of couples where we have a stable earning husband married to a stable earning wife. This is by far the most common combination of husbands and wives earnings groups in the data, and together describes about 47%. 6% of couples follow a jointly mobile pattern where spouses earnings vary in similar ways over time. So this includes, for example, a career pause wife married to a husband with late increasing earnings. 5% of couples follow a taking turns pattern where spouses alternate over time who's the primary earner. This includes, for example, a late decreasing wife married to a husband with late increasing earnings. 34% follow a male breadwinner pattern in the long term. So this includes stable earning husbands married to, for example, career pause wives or low earning wives. And then a smaller proportion follows a female breadwinner pattern in the long term. And this is really comprised of couples where we have a stable earning wife married to a husband with declining earnings or late increasing earnings. And so by taking a long-term approach to measuring the association between spouses' earnings, I find that actually long-term gender egalitarian earnings patterns are more common than professional estimates might suggest. So I find that about 60% of couples ultimately follow approximately similar earnings patterns over the marital life course, as opposed to the 30% or so that was reported in the case.
Just,
Yeah.
but that's earning patterns, not levels. So if
Yeah.
you say egalitarian pattern could be consistent with vast differences.
There could, I mean, yes, so that's true, that's true. So the group-based trajectory model takes into consideration both the shape of the trajectory and the level. So I'm happy in the Q&A to talk through some additional slides on exactly that. Okay. The results also show that gender egalitarian earnings patterns take several forms within the population. As I find that dual career patterns are by far the most common form of long-term gender equality and earnings, but taking turns into jointly mobile patterns together represent alternative forms of long-term gender equality and earnings that together represent about 11%. Then finally, in the last stage of analysis, which I'll just have a moment to preview now, I examined how the spouse's socioeconomic characteristics at the time of marriage predict the long-term earnings configurations that couples ultimately follow, in an effort to try to understand which couples are most likely to follow a dual career pattern versus these other patterns, and what might this mean for both gender equality and for economic inequalities. To do this, I use a multinomial logistic regression model with this 5-category measure of couple pregnancy outcomes. My independent variables include measures of wives' own socioeconomic status at the time of marriage, which is measured as her education, earnings, and labor supply in the year of marriage, and also measures of wives' socioeconomic status at the time of marriage relative to her husband. So this includes her relative education, earnings, and labor. I also include a variety of controls in the model, including wife's age gap between spouses, similar number of children born to the couple, and whether the wife is. And this table here summarizes sort of the key takeaways and patterns from these results. This table shows how wives' absolute socioeconomic characteristics and her relative characteristics at the time of marriage are associated with the probability of falling each of these 5 different long-term earnings configurations. And looking just at the patterns for these 3 more gender egalitarian patterns, the results suggest that gender egalitarian long-term earnings patterns appear to be highly stratified by socioeconomic status, couple socioeconomic status, and particularly wives' socioeconomic status. I find that dual career couples are characterized by highly educated, high-earning wives who are then married to husbands with even higher levels of earnings, whereas jointly mobile and taking turns couples are characterized more by wives with lower levels of education, lower levels of earnings, and then these wives are married to husbands with even lower levels of earnings. And so by taking a long-term approach to measuring the association between spouses' earnings, the results of the study have some important implications for our understanding of gender equality and really the stratification of gender equality. The scholarship has long debated to what extent gender equality within different sex couples is really a privilege that's largely reserved for high SES, or highly educated couples, but the argument being that either high SES couples have a greater preference for gender egalitarian arrangements, or these couples are better able to achieve these gender egalitarian arrangements because they have better access to the kinds of services and social supports that can help facilitate gender equality within families. And the results of this study show that long-term gender egalitarian earnings patterns are not necessarily reserved for high SES couples, but rather that these long-term gender egalitarian earnings patterns look qualitatively different according to spouses, according to couples' socioeconomic status. I find that high SES couples are much more likely to follow a dual career pattern that's really characterized by joint earnings stability over the life course, whereas lower SES couples are much more likely to follow a taking turns pattern or a joint mobile pattern that is characterized by joint earnings instability over the life course. And so these findings also indicate that it's couples who are already more advantaged at the time of marriage who are most likely to have the benefit of having two stable earners over the marital life course, whereas lower SES individuals are not only more likely to experience earnings instability, a sizable proportion of these individuals are also married to spouses who also experience earnings instability. And so taken together, these findings highlight that the concentration of earnings stability and earnings instability within couples is an important dimension of economic homogamy that likely has some important consequences for inequalities between couples, and that warrants further study.
You, Allison, we have time for a couple of short questions, comments.
Yeah, Allison, so much. This is really interesting. I don't know if this is a short question. I was just really curious to hear more about the dual group trajectory model.
Yeah. Let's see if I can.
Oh, I'm sorry, Allison. I just switched you out.
Okay.
Let me see if I can get you back. Hold on. Okay, I think you should, let me just get you opened up. You should be able to share again. There you go.
Okay.
You won't be able to make any changes back from.
I'm just trying to advance.
Are you at your last slide?
Trying to go to the next one, to the appendix.
Hold on, try again. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So. May not click that.
You'll need to click from your clicker. Sorry. There you go.
This is gonna be.
If you need me to support you, let me know.
Okay, maybe we'll stick to just talking. So group-based trajectory modeling, so it's an application of finite mixture modeling that uses maximum likelihood estimation to identify or estimate these multiple qualitatively existing patterns in the population. It's like fundamentally a different way of approaching modeling longitudinal data than like growth curve modeling, where we estimate a single mean population trajectory, and then we can explain variation around that mean trajectory. Instead, in group-based trajectory modeling, we first, before thinking about what variables might explain this variation, we try to identify variation in the population. And then you can try to examine who's most likely to follow a long-term earnings pattern that looks like this, and who's most likely to follow a long-term earnings pattern that looks like this. So it's just a different way of summarizing heterogeneity in developmental patterns. I don't know if does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? The downside of having two great graduation papers is that we had to split. We only have 30 minutes for presentation, but Allison is around. If you have any more questions or stuff like that. So why don't we move to the next presenter, Agustin Diaz Casanueva, and Victor Rios Rul, who was on the selection committee, is going to do the introduction.
Say only two things. Agustin is a central banker. What do I mean by that? He does this out of love. People around him is shocked of his sheer curiosity about these issues. So what is it that he's concerned about? Well, a bunch of teenage young ladies. Things that happen to them. They can go to school, can get pregnant. Those are the things that leave a very long shadow. He was concerned about, do they interfere? Do they mix? You want to tell us what this guy?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victor. That nice introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's an important place to me, and it's 6 years building, so I'm waiting my slide.
Just a moment, we're getting there.
I remember like yesterday when I was doing my problems that actually that they would, because Econ used to be in these buildings.
Just a second. Okay, you should be able to do that now. There you are.
So speakers say now I got it and I'm in Central Bank, usual disclaimers that really don't apply for this.
Steve, you want to just move that microphone up just a little bit? There you go. As close to the center as you can get. There you go.
Here?
Yep, try again.
So let me tell you about the motivation of the paper. I got it. So basically, when we see the data, we see a negative relationship between cognitive ability test scores and the age at which women have their first pregnancy. And if we look at the LSY 79, thanks Allison, now I don't need to explain the data set. And we rank women by their cognitive ability test score. The ones who are in the bottom quartile, 28% of them are going to have a teen pregnancy, or they had a teen pregnancy. And in the top quartile, only 3% have one. And in economics, the literature has emphasized education-based difference in fertility time, which are attributed to two main mechanisms. One is the allocation of time, and this idea is that non-college women have a lower opportunity cost to raise kids early. And the other one is the education and fertility risk theory. And what this theory says is that opportunity cost is not enough to explain difference in fertility timing. And so education should give you something else. And they rationalize this something else as an increase in contraception efficiency. So what I'm going to do in my work, I am going to see if the relationship between cognitive ability and pregnancy timing is explained by the relationship between cognitive ability and education, or if there is something else beyond education. And I think this is a very important topic, and this is why I really like it, because it's going to have important repercussions in the child and also in the mom. We know that maternal age is going to take children human capital investment and later life outcomes. And also we know that pregnancies affect multiple women outcomes like education, marital choice, labor supply, and mental health, for example. And also early pregnancies are more prevalent in low-income women. So this also increase intergenerational mobility. So what I am going to do in the paper? First, I am going to summarize the difference in marital status, individual and parental income, between women with an early pregnancy. I am thinking an early pregnancy before 22 years old, and the ones without. And then I am going to study the correlation in the data between cognitive ability and the probability of having a first childbirth at different ages, and how this change when we account for education and health. And then I am going to use, I'm going to build and estimate a life cycle model with endogenous fertility, education, and merit to measure the impact of cognitive ability, education, and weight. And then I'm going to use the model to answer how much of the relationship between ability and fertility is accounted by the relationship to education and weight. And finally, I am going to use the model to answer two questions. The first one is women in the model are having, teenager moms are having low educational attainment because they have a baby and it's too costly to go to college with the baby. Or as they are not going to college, they decide to have an early, they decide to have a baby as. And then I am going to use the model to understand the mechanism behind the drop in teen pregnancies in the embryo. So let me go to the data. So I am going to use the LSY 79, and I am going to estimate a static linear model with cognitive ability as a latent factor, and I'm going to estimate at 3 moments of time. I'm going to estimate between 14 and 17, and what is going to be the probability of have a first childbirth Then I'm going to estimate between 18 and 21, and then I'm going to do between 22 and 29. Unfortunately, between 14 and 17, I cannot, the impact of ability is going to be biased because high ability women, basically they have expectation to go to college. So this is, and also they know that they're going to have higher weight. So I'm going to be capturing part of that bias here. So then between 18 and 21, education is realized. But still, I don't know how weights affect them. And then between 22 and 29, I can control by education and income. But the problem that I have between 22 and 29 is that I don't have basically low ability women who have kids so later in life. So then I'm going to basically, I need to use the model to understand how important it is. But I think it's important to show that this is how is this in the data and how saying as we control by education and learning. So what I found is that the difference between women who are in the top quartile of the ability distribution compared with the ones who are in the bottom quartile, they are 50% less likely to have a teen pregnancy. And when they ask about pregnancy intention, they are around 20% less likely. And then between 18 and 21, they are 13% less likely, and attend college seems to be quite important. Actually, the ones who are attending college are 80% less likely to have a pregnancy. And then between 22 and 29, I don't find that ability is important. But the problem that I have is that I don't have many low ability women who already don't have a kid at this point. Like basically most of the bottom of the distribution, they have kids before 21 years old. So I am going to use the model to understand basically how important is ability at each point of time. So let me show you the model. I'm going to use a life cycle model that represents agent life between 14 and 49 years old. Women are fertile between 14 and 29 years old, and women can marry only once time in the model. And there is not going to be divorce. And they only can have one child. Yeah, it's a big assumption, but it's a computational assumption to simplify it. And I'm not going to have assets or weights uncertainty. So let me show you the timing of the model. The first period is going to represent between 14 and 17 years old, and they're going to take decisions sequentially, and each decision is going to be basically a subperiod. But at the beginning of the first period, they're going to decide contraception. After they know if they have a child or not, they are going to decide if continue high school or not. If they continue, they drop high school, they can work as a high school dropout. Then they're going to decide consumption and child investment in the case that they have a child. And after this, they're going to decide if attend college or not. The ones who are attending college, at the beginning of the period are going to choose contraception. Again, after they know if they have a child or not, they can decide if continue college or not. And then they are going to decide consumption and child investment. And the ones who didn't attend college, they're going to move to be young adults immediately. The college one are going to move to be young adults after they finish college. And by young adult, I mean they are going to choose at the beginning of the period, they are going to meet someone and they can decide if marriage or not. Then they're going to choose contraception, and after they know if they have a child or not, they can decide consumption and child investment. And the rest of their life, they just consume. So for sake of time, let me just show the most important value function, but basically agents are going to estimate, are going to maximize consumption, and they're going to receive consumption utility for consumption, but also they're going to receive utility through investing their kids. So the one we have a kid, basically they're going to receive that amount of utility that is increasing in child investment. And we see the body constraint, the weight of this is the weight of the mom, and where W8 is the weight of the husband, is going to be heterogeneous in ability, education, if they have a child, and the age at which they have a child. And this is another important decision in my model, that this is the amount of contraception. And basically, contraception is going to be costly. The parameter that determine the cost of contraception is P. And I am thinking contraception cost as a utility cost. And the idea of this is that it's not only going to be a monetary cost, it's going to be a non-monetary cost, like physical, psychological, or social cost of contraception. And let me show you how works the probability of having a child. So the probability of having a child is a CES nested in a logit, and lambda E is going to give the importance of education, how education is going to affect contraception, and lambda A is going to give how ability affects contraception. So if ability is not important for contraception, this parameter should be 0 when I estimate the inequality. And then the other important decision in my model is attend college or not. And basically, agents are going to decide if attend college, if the value of attend college is higher than the value of going to the labor market as a high school graduate. But also, the ones who attend college, the cost of attend college is going to depend on their ability, but also if they already have a child, or if they have a child. So the estimation, I estimate the model in 3 groups of parameters. First, I estimate the parameters that are exogenous, that these are basically the discount factor and the risk aversion. I take them from the literature. Then I estimate the weight process from outside the model. And the rest of the parameters I estimate using the simulated method of models. So let me show you how the model feeds the data. And these are the moments that relate ability with fertility timing. I think I can do a good job when they are between 14 and 17. I can capture the positive relationship between the probability of having a pregnancy and cognitive ability. Between 18 and 21, I still can, I think I do a reasonable job, but I am struggling a little bit between 22 and 29 because the model is, I am getting a correlation higher than in the data. That it seems that ability is not so much correlated with pregnancy at this point. So this is something I am working on. And then when I look how the model fits the moments that relate education with pregnancy, I do a good job. And the ones who relate attend college with ability, I can match the bottom of the distribution, but I struggle a little bit at the very top. But I think this is not surprising because I don't have borrowing constraint and I don't have parents. So this is explaining why the high ability group attend college so much. And then let me show you why it's important to add cognitive ability in the model. So first, I am going to estimate a baseline model, and in this baseline model, opportunity cost is going to be the only thing that create heterogeneity in fertility timing. There is only going to be opportunity. So any difference why some women have kids earlier or later is going to be given for the opportunity cost. And then I am going to allow to contraception be heterogeneous in education, and then I am going to allow contraception be heterogeneous in ability. So when I allow contraception, and I am going to measure the success of the model, like the sum of square errors. So when I allow for heterogeneity in education, the fit of the model improves a lot, and the relationship between ability and fertility also improves. But this comes at the cost that is not doing a good job at matching the relationship between education and fertility. So basically, it's using, what I am doing is that if I don't add ability, I need to create contrafactual results, results that are not consistent with the data in order to match fertility and ability. And then when I allow heterogeneity, the model is can do a much better job explaining the data. And then let me show you two exercises that I did. And the first one, I tried to understand if the reason because teen mothers are not attending college, it is because the pregnancy is too costly, or because they're not going to attend college, they decide to have children's early. So the first thing that I do is that I give to everyone in the model the contraception technology of the high ability ones. Then, and the rest of the model, keep the rest of the model constant. Then I come back to the original model, but I give to everyone the cost and the return of the allocation high ability ones. And then I'm going to give both things together. So when I provide equal contraception technology for everyone, teen pregnancies almost disappear, but college attendance, it doesn't increase much. So how I read this is that basically these women are not attending college not because they have a baby and it's too costly, it's because they are already quite behind. And then if I increase college access, college attendance increase a lot, but teen pregnancy doesn't decrease so much as college attendance. So there are other factors that are making that these teens are having kids. That is not only that they are not going to attend college place. And then when I do both together, college attendance increase a lot and teen pregnancies almost. And the other exercise that I did is that during the 90s, teen pregnancies fall a lot. Unfortunately, there is a second survey that is an NLSY 97 who follow basically teens during the 90s. So I can re-estimate my model with this data set and change one set of parameters that affect each mechanism of the model to understand how a change in each, how much of the declining teen pregnancy is explained for each mechanism. So first, I changed the parameters that control weight, and I found that the declining teen pregnancies and college attendance doesn't seem to be explained for this, only explained 5% in the case of teen pregnancy. When I change the parameters that determine how much parents like to invest in their kids, the results are basically the same. When I change the parameters that determine college access in the model, college attendance increased, and this explains 36% of the increase in college attendance, and 16% of the increase in teen pregnancies. And when I change the parameters that determine contraception, basically they explain almost all the declining contraception, right? Almost all the declining teen pregnancies, 80%. And consistent with what I found before, this doesn't affect much college attendance. And finally, the other factors of the model seem to explain the increase in college attendance. So this is it. Basically, the conclusion that I have for now is that cognitive ability impacts fertility, beyond education and opportunity growth. Improving contraception method reduce early pregnancies, but it does not increase college attendance among this group. They are probably already too behind college. And that the declining teen pregnancies, at least in my model, is mainly increased for college access, but especially by increasing contraception. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Agustin. Questions, comments?
I just have a quick question. Could you talk a little bit more about like how you're defining like what the measured cognitive ability is capturing? Like how is that measured? Yeah.
Can I?
Laura?
Hi, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry,
You're advancing or
so,
where, are you going forward? or-
yeah, I have to go back to,
Okay, there's a backward button there that you should be able to use, but I'm going back. You let me know when to stop.
go a little bit more. More. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
So basically what I am using is the AFQ test that is in the, yeah, sorry, let me go to the slide. Can I move there? I cannot.
You can move from the clicker back and forth. If
So,
you prefer.
okay, that slide, probably I need to go to the measuring system. But basically, I'm using
That help?
the AFQT test. In the NSY, they test the kid. There is a general test of cognitive ability. That is the ARMEL for qualification test. It's kind of a standard test in this literature.
The SAT. I know them are. It's what the Army gives you. It's just, it's like an easy SAT.
Yeah. And they built a measure to approximate cognitive ability in some part of the test. But the problem of this is that there is measurement error, but the other issue is that probably people who is older or they have more years of education, they tend to test scores higher. They have higher scores. So basically, I'm going to estimate a latent factor that's going to be theta. And then I am going to control for basically, this is going to be the test, and then I am going to control for race, both parent education, broken for, and house was broken at 14, basically. But my idea of cognitive ability is this latent factor that I take from the NLSY 79, and I correct for what I can correct. That's the measurement that I use.
What is cognitive ability to family background?
I don't have the measuring in mind, but it's quite correlated. I try to correct by race, both parent education, but still it's quite correlated. But it's super correlated in US with race. So I was quite impressed when I controlled for race.
You said that improving, decreasing early fertility didn't have an impact on college, but still it could have impact in weight. So that's another kind of economics channel through which lowering, and I didn't see that. Did you measure?
No, I estimate the weight process is going to depend if you have a kid early or not. So women that didn't go to college, but they were not teen mom, they have higher weight in the mother. So the welfare increase, but but for them, college is still too costly. Like they are too behind to apply to college. But the weight increase
for having a kid early, even if you don't go to college.
Sorry,
There's still a big wage penalty.
Yeah.
For having a kid early, even if you didn't.
I didn't show it, but I estimate that penalty, and I add to the choice, to the model, and then that's going to affect the choice.
Okay, I would like to thank Allison and Agustin for wonderful presentations today. The graduate group, and I also would like to thank Victor, Jerry, and Courtney for being on the selection committee. And so I think Ian will be happy, no? Or what do you think?
Just keep it going on.
Thank you.